Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/IDontWorkHereLady and our story for today. A bizarre morning at Sainsbury's. But before we start, thanks to everyone who's clicking on like and subscribing to the channel. So, a little background before we go on. I work as a career for people with autism and learning disabilities. On Sunday mornings after breakfast, I always take one of the guys I'm working with to the local Sainsbury's for him to buy snacks and cigarettes. Sainsbury's is a very orange-themed store, which is coincidentally my favorite color, and so I'm wearing a couple of things that are orange. Strangely, Sainsbury's staff wear maroon tops, with the name of the store written in orange. That's about all you need to know beforehand, so let's go. As mentioned in the intro, I always take one of my guys to the cafe in Sainsbury's for a cup of tea before letting him loose in the store to buy his items of choice. While he's doing that, I go grab a couple of energy drinks and wander into the aisle where books and magazines and DVDs and a really crappy selection of video games are to be found. I've been in that aisle for several minutes and I decide to go and check out how my guy's getting on with his shopping. I like to promote his independence and freedom of choice by just letting him roam free within the store. He's never any bother to anyone. So as I'm leaving the aisle I'm in, a lady who I would estimate to be in her 50s comes round the corner from the aisle that runs down the center of all the aisles. I see her lock onto me and approach me, and she asks me where she could find this thing with an Italian-sounding name. I say I never heard of it and have no idea where to even start with that one. So I just say, "I'm sorry, darling, I don't work here. But you see those ladies wearing maroon over there?" Pointing at them. "I'm sure they'll know where to find it." She responds by saying, "But you're wearing orange." And to be fair, she was correct. I was wearing a gray super dry jacket which has orange zips and pull strings on the hood, as well as a bright orange super dry logo on the back right shoulder. Under that, I was wearing a gray super dry hoodie which had a strip of orange in the inside of the hood. But the most obvious thing is that I'm wearing a bright orange beanie hat because it's cold outside. My response to that was just, "Yeah, I like orange." And with that, I just walk away. I cross the central dividing aisle and walk into the aisle that's directly opposite the one I'd just been in. I'd probably only taken about 5 steps into that aisle when I hear from behind me a scream, or what might better be described as wailing and sobbing. I turned around and saw the lady I'd just spoken to on her knees in the middle of the aisle. My first thought was maybe she'd slipped on something and twisted her ankle. I'm just about to go help her, but stopped when one of the shop assistants came running from the aisle next door and ran straight up to her. I was still going to go over as I'm a trained first aider. The assistant who went to her aid asked her what was wrong, and she looked directly at me, pointed at me, and screamed that I had shouted at her and slapped her. My jaw just dropped and I thought, "You've got to be effing kidding me." More store assistants showed up and they quickly speak to each other, and one comes over to talk to me and ask me what happened. I just stood there stunned as this lady's going crazy and making a huge scene inside the store. I tell the assistant that all I said was I don't work here and directed her to someone who did and that I in no way touched her. Some staff were speaking into walkie-talkies, and soon the store's manageress comes running through the store. The whole time I'm protesting my innocence. The manageress approaches me and I tell her the same thing, that I had in no way touched her. She informs me that because there was an allegation of assault, they were obliged to call the police and that I would have to wait for them. At this time, I saw my service user who had naturally come over to see what all the commotion was about, and I called him over to me and had to explain to him what had happened too. The store assistant wanting to calm things down by removing me from this lady's view, so me, my service user, and the store assistant walked down the opposite aisle and through the checkout, dropping off my guy's shopping basket at the customer service desk before sitting us down on a bench behind the checkouts. 3 staff remain with the lady while the manageress, who is on the phone, goes behind the customer service desk where she starts looking at CCTV. At this time, I know I might end up having even more issues with my service user, who seems anxious as F, and I knew it was probably going to get a lot worse as soon as the police arrived on scene. I took advantage of the few minutes I had to calmly explain more fully to him what was happening and that I needed to speak to the police when they arrived. I explained that neither of us had done anything wrong and I just needed to speak to them, and that I was sure we would both be free to leave shortly. I asked him to sit quietly until then and not to worry about anything. At this time, an old lady came through the checkout and came up to me and said that she saw everything that happened and knew I'd done nothing wrong. I asked if she would mind sticking around and telling that to the police when they got here, and she said she would be happy to. So a couple of minutes later, the police arrived in store and were directed to the screaming mess flailing around on the floor. A male and female police officers went over to deal with her. From where I was sitting, I had a clear line of sight to her, and everybody in the building could hear her. Thankfully, the store had just recently opened and wasn't busy at all, but new customers were slowly trickling into the store to be greeted by the tantrum from hell. I could see that the male officer seemed to be familiar with the lady, but he was having no success at calming her down. About 2 minutes later, another 2 police officers arrive on scene, yet again a male and a female. They were met at the door by the store's manageress, who directed them to the screaming lady and also turned and pointed at me. The male officer turned, looked at me, and I raised my hand slightly to acknowledge him. The female officer goes over to join her colleagues, and the male approaches me. So, this officer comes over, and I explain to him exactly what I've explained already in this post. After I get through telling him, he takes a somewhat accusatory tone, saying that if that's all that happened, why is she acting that way, and that something else must have happened. I told him no. I walked away and she just started doing what he himself could see her doing right now. I told him she'd been like that for the last 10 minutes or so. At this time, the guy's partner wanders back over but doesn't say anything to me. She just stands there while I tell her partner about my service user who's sitting next to me. While I'm talking to him, the old lady from earlier approaches the female officer and tells her that she saw everything and I did nothing wrong. Now, what really pissed me off about this entire thing is that she just dismissed her, told her she had it handled, and asked her to move along. I think this was wrong, and if I were to be arrested, I was certainly going to make a fuss about that when I'm questioned. As the old lady wanders off, the manageress comes over to the same female officer, and they both step away a little bit. I don't hear everything they say, but I did hear that the woman has previously been banned from the store twice for causing problems. Then I hear her tell her it's all on CCTV, and she leads the officer to the customer service desk. I breathe a sigh of relief. So as she walks away, the first officer who came in and rushed straight to the alleged victim came wandering over, and both male officers have a quick chat. Then he turns to me and says sorry for the inconvenience and that we were free to go. To be honest, that kind of took me by surprise. They hadn't finished viewing the CCTV yet, but this officer knew the score and knew I'd done nothing wrong. I said something like, "Oh, so we're free to finish our shopping?" And he said we were, adding that the lady had a history of mental illness, which I'd already figured out, and that she does things like this from time to time to get sympathy and attention. Well, you didn't have to tell me twice. Actually, he did, if you think about it. I stood up and said thanks and grabbed my service user and headed to the customer service desk. As I did so, the female officer came back around from it, even though I didn't see it. I know the first officer who was behind me waved her off from approaching me. I just smiled at her and walked right past her. All the time, this bloody woman is still screaming. I pick up the basket from the customer service desk and head straight for the checkout. Now all the coppers go over to this woman, and even though I'm sympathetic to the behaviors of this mentally ill person, I have to confess part of me was thinking, great, we get to watch her get arrested. I know that's bad, right? But I'm still a human after all. I can't help thinking that. Anyway, it doesn't matter, as that's not what happened. Instead, 2 African or possible Jamaican women show up and go into the aisle. Not long after, all 3 of them come out of the aisle, with the 2 carers using a technique I'm very familiar with called a double wraparound arm hold, and they march her out of the store and into a car outside. We head back within the store while this was happening and try to prevent her from seeing me and potentially kicking off again. Soon after they left, and so did the police. Once everybody was gone, me and my buddy walked home, talking about it all the way. When I got back, I told my manager what had happened, mainly because I told the police where I worked. So really just to give her a heads up, so if anybody did get in touch, that she wasn't completely in the dark. My manager thought it was hilarious and even tried to get me to write an incident report, but I argued that down because my guy wasn't involved in the incident. No, the job of writing that report lay in the hands of some other person in some other company in some other place, not me. Now my shift is over and I'm back home. I still did feel like writing my story, but I prefer to do it for you folks here. If it does end up needing to be done, I can just come back and copy and paste it from this page. Hell, I might just directly give them the link. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you soon.